In recent months, one claim has quietly captured attention across financial forums, alternative economics channels, and geopolitical discussion platforms, that Russia may have acquired 5,000 tons of physical silver through discrete off-market channels. At first glance, this seems almost unbelievable. 5,000 tons is not a routine transaction. It is not a casual trade that could be ignored by markets or analysts. Understanding the scale, the implications, and the context is essential to separating sensationalism from strategy. The claim suggests that the silver was purchased outside traditional commodity exchanges through bilateral agreements, direct producer contracts, or state-owned enterprises acting beyond public scrutiny. There has been no official confirmation, no press release, no photograph of vaults stacked with silver. Governments rarely announce strategic accumulation of such magnitude in real time. Silence, in this context, should not automatically be read as denial, nor should it be interpreted as confirmation. The narrative has captured attention because it fits within a broader pattern of behavior observed over the past decade. Since 2014, Russia has faced repeated rounds of sanctions restricting access to Western financial systems. The freezing of assets, the limitation of trade options, and the vulnerability of dollar-denominated reserves have created incentives for alternative strategies. In response, Russia has visibly increased gold reserves, signaling a preference for hard assets that cannot be frozen, manipulated, or politically weaponized. Silver, however, operates differently. It is not merely a hedge against inflation or currency instability. It has industrial applications that are central to modern technology, energy, and defense. Silver is both a monetary and industrial metal. Unlike gold, which is primarily stored and seldom consumed, silver is embedded in electronics, solar panels, medical devices, electric vehicles, and advanced military equipment. Once used, much of it is permanently removed from the supply chain. This makes large accumulations particularly impactful. The alleged 5,000-ton purchase would represent roughly 160 million troy ounces, or nearly 20% of annual global mine production. Acquiring such a quantity openly would likely move markets dramatically. The claim suggests, however, that the accumulation happened quietly, raising questions about the methods, channels, and intentions behind the move. Understanding why such a claim resonates requires considering both market mechanics and strategic incentives. Commodity markets often reflect paper representations of supply. Futures contracts, derivatives, and exchanges can mask the real availability of physical metal. For nations seeking resilience, physical assets are not just stores of value. They are functional, tangible, and less vulnerable to external shocks. In a constrained market, even the perception of a large sovereign buyer can influence behavior. Traders, manufacturers, and investors all react to probabilities, expectations, and indirect signals, sometimes long before official confirmation appears. From a geopolitical perspective, the potential accumulation fits a broader pattern. Russia has pursued economic sovereignty, reducing reliance on the US dollar, diversifying reserves, and emphasizing strategic self-reliance. Gold provided a clear, documented precedent. Silver, though less discussed, aligns with similar logic. It can serve as a hedge, an industrial reserve, and a form of strategic leverage. Unlike gold, which primarily preserves wealth, silver preserves capability. It ensures access to materials critical for technological infrastructure, energy systems, and military readiness. Critics argue the claim is implausible. The logistics of moving thousands of tons of metal, the potential impact on global prices, and the lack of official evidence are all valid concerns. Yet, state-level buyers do not operate like private investors. They leverage long-term contracts, direct relationships with producers, and non-transparent channels. Accumulation need not be immediate or visible to be strategically significant. Ultimately, whether or not Russia actually purchased 5,000 tons of silver, the conversation itself is revealing. It underscores a growing awareness that fiat currencies are under scrutiny, that hard assets are regaining strategic importance, and that industrially relevant commodities like silver can play multiple roles in national security and economic planning. The discussion is less about a single transaction and more about a shift in how nations think about resilience, leverage, and the future of global finance. To understand why the claim of a massive silver purchase resonates so strongly, we must examine the global silver market itself. Silver is often misunderstood because it does not behave like most commodities. Unlike oil, copper, or iron, silver is not consumed in a single dominant sector. Unlike gold, it is not held primarily for wealth storage. Instead, silver sits at a rare intersection of finance, industry, and technology. Global silver supply is constrained by structural realities. Most silver is not mined as a primary metal. Roughly 70% of global silver production comes as a byproduct of mining for other metals such as copper, lead, zinc, and gold. This means silver supply does not easily respond to changes in silver demand. Even if prices rise significantly, miners cannot simply double silver output without increasing production of entirely different metals, which may not be economically justified. This creates a fragile supply chain. When industrial demand increases or investment demand spikes, the market often experiences shortages not because silver has disappeared, but because it cannot be brought to market quickly enough. Over the past decade, this dynamic has become increasingly visible. Renewable energy expansion, electrification, and digital infrastructure have all intensified silver consumption. Solar panels are one of the most important examples. Each photovoltaic cell requires silver for conductivity. Even with ongoing efforts to reduce silver loading, total demand continues to rise as global solar deployment accelerates. Electric vehicles use more silver than traditional internal combustion vehicles. Advanced electronics, medical applications, and military systems rely on silver's unmatched conductive and antimicrobial properties. At the same time, above-ground silver inventories have been quietly declining. Unlike gold, much of the silver used in industry is dispersed in tiny quantities and never economically recovered. Over decades, this results in a permanent loss of available metal. Estimates vary, but some analysts suggest that a significant portion of all silver ever mined has been consumed and is effectively gone. This backdrop is critical. In a market with limited elasticity, even rumors of large-scale accumulation can alter behavior. Manufacturers may increase stockpiling. Investors may shift allocations. Traders may anticipate tighter conditions. This is why the alleged Russian purchase matters even without confirmation. It interacts with an already tight system. It is also important to recognize how modern commodity markets function. Price discovery often occurs in paper markets rather than physical ones. Futures contracts, options, and derivatives can create the illusion of abundant supply even when physical inventories are thin. This disconnect has been a recurring theme in silver markets for decades. Physical silver, by contrast, must exist somewhere. It must be mined, refined, transported, stored, and secured. Large quantities cannot vanish or appear without logistical footprints. When physical metal moves into long-term storage under sovereign control, it effectively leaves the market, even if prices do not immediately reflect that reality. This is where state-level behavior differs fundamentally from private actors. Governments do not trade for short-term profit. They accumulate for strategic reasons. They can afford patience, and they are often willing to absorb costs in exchange for security, independence, or leverage. From this perspective, the idea that a sanctioned nation might quietly accumulate a critical industrial metal begins to appear less speculative and more strategic. The silver market structure makes it uniquely sensitive to such actions, even when they remain unofficial. To fully grasp why silver could play a role in Russia's long-term planning, we must revisit the country's economic trajectory since 2014. That year marked a turning point. Sanctions imposed following geopolitical events fundamentally altered Russia's relationship with Western financial systems. Access to capital markets was restricted. Foreign reserves became a vulnerability rather than a safeguard. Trust in externally controlled institutions diminished. In response, Russia began a gradual but deliberate shift toward economic sovereignty. This was not a sudden move, nor was it hidden. The accumulation of gold reserves was one of the most visible expressions of this strategy. Over several years, Russia became one of the world's largest buyers of gold, reducing exposure to U.S. Treasury securities and increasing holdings of physical assets stored domestically. Gold, however, addresses only part of the problem. It preserves value, but it does not directly support industrial production or technological independence. A modern economy requires inputs. It requires materials that can be transformed into energy systems, electronics, transportation networks, and defense capabilities. This is where silver's role becomes more compelling. Silver is not merely a hedge against currency instability. It is a functional asset. It supports manufacturing capacity. It underpins technological development. And, unlike many critical materials, it is globally fungible, difficult to sanction, and hard to substitute. Sanctions work best when they target choke points, payment systems, insurance, shipping, intellectual property, and specialized components. Physical commodities that are widely used and difficult to trace are far harder to control. Once stored within a country's borders, they become immune to many forms of external pressure. From a strategic standpoint, accumulating silver could serve multiple objectives simultaneously. It could hedge against inflation and currency debasement. It could secure supply for domestic industry. It could provide leverage in trade negotiations. And it could act as a silent reserve asset in a world where financial warfare has become normalized. Critics often argue that silver is too bulky, too volatile, or too impractical for state reserves. These objections are not without merit. Silver requires more storage space than gold. Its price fluctuates more dramatically. It lacks the same historical role in central banking. But these criticisms assume that silver would replace gold. That assumption may be flawed. Silver does not need to displace gold to be valuable. It can complement it. In a diversified reserve strategy, different assets serve different purposes. Moreover, history shows that silver has played a monetary role far longer than gold in many civilizations. For centuries, silver coins formed the backbone of daily commerce across Europe and Asia. Its demonetization is a relatively recent phenomenon, driven more by convenience than by intrinsic shortcomings. In a world where trust in fiat systems is increasingly questioned, revisiting older models of value storage is not as radical as it once seemed. Whether Russia has acted on this logic at the scale suggested by the claim remains uncertain, but the reasoning itself is coherent. No responsible analysis would be complete without addressing skepticism. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary scrutiny, and the idea of a single nation acquiring 5,000 tons of silver naturally invites questions. Where would the metal even come from? How could it be transported and stored without creating visible disruptions in the global market? Why has no definitive evidence emerged to support such a massive transaction? These are not trivial concerns. They are the exact reasons why analysts, journalists, and investors approach the claim cautiously. Yet, the absence of public confirmation does not necessarily mean the story is false. Governments and central banks rarely announce strategic accumulation in real time. History is full of examples where nations quietly built reserves over years, only for the scale to be revealed later, if at all. In many ways, secrecy is part of the strategy. Transparency in strategic assets can reduce their effectiveness, invite speculation, or trigger preemptive moves by other actors. From this perspective, the lack of official acknowledgement may be entirely consistent with how state-level accumulation typically occurs. Critics also argue that acquiring such a vast quantity of silver would be logistically impossible. 5,000 tons is not only a monumental number, it is physically enormous. Storing, transporting, and securing it would require infrastructure on a scale few private actors or even governments maintain casually. These are valid points, but they assume a single, visible purchase. A more nuanced possibility is gradual accumulation over time, spread across multiple channels, multiple producers, or even multiple countries. What appears as a singular, dramatic claim may, in reality, be the summation of years of carefully orchestrated actions. Viewed through this lens, skepticism is healthy, but it does not dismiss the plausibility entirely. Market reactions provide another layer of insight. Silver prices have fluctuated, yet they have not experienced the kind of sustained breakout one might expect if a fifth of global annual production had suddenly been removed from circulation. This suggests either that the claim purchase did not occur on the scale suggested, or that it was executed with extraordinary care to avoid market disruption. Paper markets, futures, options, and derivatives can absorb large quantities of demand without immediately affecting spot prices. Physical supply constraints, however, are often invisible until they manifest in shortages, delivery delays, or rising premiums for actual metal. This duality between paper and physical markets adds complexity to evaluating such claims. Even if the numbers are exaggerated, the broader implications are significant. The story speaks to strategy, incentives, and context, not just raw tonnage. It reflects an emerging worldview, one in which nations reconsider reliance on fiat currencies, diversify reserves into hard assets, and prioritize control over critical industrial materials. Whether or not Russia executed this specific purchase, the narrative resonates because it aligns with observed behavior over the past decade: sanctions avoidance, de-dollarization, and strategic asset accumulation. For investors and ordinary observers, the lesson is not to chase unverified claims or panic based on speculation. The lesson lies in understanding the structures and dynamics shaping modern commodity markets. Industrial demand for silver continues to grow. Supply constraints are structural, not temporary. Geopolitical risks are rising. Strategic thinking is evolving. These are observable realities that affect markets, investment decisions, and long-term planning, regardless of the precise details of any one transaction. Ultimately, the significance of the alleged purchase lies in what it reveals about priorities and foresight. Hard assets are no longer merely financial instruments. They are strategic tools, bridging wealth preservation, industrial capability, and geopolitical leverage. Nations increasingly recognize that access to essential commodities can be as important as access to capital, and that physical control over materials may determine resilience in an uncertain world. Whether the deal happened exactly as reported may never be publicly known. Governments do not typically reveal their most sensitive economic decisions in real time, but the discussion itself offers insight. It highlights a quiet yet profound shift in how powerful nations perceive value, risk, and influence. The story is not just about a single purchase of silver. It is about the strategic mindset driving nations to rethink traditional financial paradigms, prioritize tangible assets, and prepare for a global order that may look very different from the one we have known. In the end, the alleged accumulation of 5,000 tons of silver is as much a symbol as it is a claim. It reminds us that in global finance, the most important moves are often invisible, unfolding quietly behind closed doors, far from headlines and public scrutiny. Understanding the incentives, context, and market dynamics behind such stories is far more valuable than focusing solely on the numbers. Because in a world where money, industry, and power intersect, perception, strategy, and preparation are just as significant as the assets themselves.